President Donald Trump just announced that the United States will not bomb Iran's power plants, at least not for 5 days. He posted the announcement in all capital letters on Truth Social this morning, declaring that he has reached, quote, major points of agreement with Tehran after what he called very good and productive conversations over the weekend. He said he told the Department of War to postpone any and all military strikes against Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure for a 5-day period. Oil prices immediately dropped. The Dow surged more than 1,000 points. Investors started betting that maybe, just maybe, the worst energy crisis since the 1970s might be coming to an end. And then, within minutes of that announcement, Israeli jets bombed central Tehran. The Israeli military confirmed that it carried out what it called a wide-scale wave of strikes on Iranian regime infrastructure, including one of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' main headquarters, weapons manufacturing sites, research facilities for ballistic missiles and warheads, all of it in the heart of the Iranian capital. And this wasn't some rogue operation Israel forgot to mention. This happened after Trump told the world that talks were going, in his words, perfectly. So here's where we are. The President of the United States says we're on the verge of a deal. Iran says there are no talks. And the bombs are still falling on Tehran. That's not one reality. That's 3 competing realities happening at the same time, and only one of them can be true. But to understand why this moment is more dangerous than it looks, I need to tell you about something that happened today in the city of Ahvaz in southwestern Iran that almost nobody in the American media is talking about. This morning, as Trump was typing his all-caps post about productive conversations, ordinary Iranian civilians in the city of Ahvaz walked out of their homes and formed a human chain around the Ramin power plant. They linked arms. Some of them held Iranian flags. They wrapped themselves physically around the infrastructure that keeps their lights on, their hospitals running, their water pumping, and they weren't alone. In Mashhad, Iran's second largest city, in the northeast of the country, another group of civilians did the same thing, forming a human chain around their local power plant. The footage was published by Iran's state-run Fars news agency. Now think about what that means. These are not soldiers. These are not Revolutionary Guard commanders. These are people, regular people, who watched the President of the United States threaten to obliterate their electricity grid, and they decided the only thing they could do was stand in front of it. To put their bodies between American bombs and the thing that keeps their children's rooms warm at night, that is where the human cost of this story lives. Not in the stock tickers, not in the diplomatic back and forth, but in the people standing in front of power plants, because they don't know if the talks that supposedly exist are real. Here's why that matters right now. This is the 4th week of the war. It started on February 28th when the United States and Israel launched a massive coordinated strike on Iran, an operation the Pentagon called Epic Fury. In the first hours, much of Iran's senior military and political leadership was killed, including the previous supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. His son, Mojtaba Khamenei, assumed the title. The US and Israel hit nuclear facilities, military bases, air defense systems. They called it a decapitation strategy. But Iran did not collapse. Iran hit back, and it kept hitting back. For 24 days now, Iran has been launching missiles and drones at Israel, at Gulf states, at US allies across the region. The United Arab Emirates alone has intercepted 352 ballistic missiles, 15 cruise missiles, and 1,789 drones since this war began. Just on Monday, the UAE shot down 7 more Iranian ballistic missiles and 16 drones. 8 people have been killed in the UAE, 161 have been wounded, and then there's the Strait of Hormuz. Iran effectively shut it down, the most important energy choke point on Earth, through which roughly a fifth of the world's crude oil passes every single day, has been blocked for weeks. A few tankers have gotten through, but for all practical purposes, the strait is closed. The head of the International Energy Agency, Fatih Birol, said on Monday that the situation is, quote, very severe, and that it is worse than the 2 energy crises of the 1970s and the fallout of the Ukraine war put together. Let that sink in for a second. The head of the IEA is saying this is worse than the 1973 oil embargo, worse than the Iranian Revolution in 1979, worse than the Ukraine shock shock. This is the worst global energy disruption in half a century, and it is happening right now. And it's hitting Americans at the pump. Gas prices have risen for 23 straight days. The national average hit $3.96 a gallon on Monday, the highest since August of 2022. The pricing app GasBuddy says the average could cross $4 this week. Goldman Sachs warned investors that if oil doesn't resume flowing through the strait within 10 weeks, Brent crude could exceed its all-time record of $147 a barrel, set in 2008. So on Saturday, Trump did what Trump does. He issued an ultimatum. He posted on Truth Social that Iran had 48 hours to reopen the Strait of Hormuz to all shipping, or the United States would, quote, obliterate Iran's power plants. 48 hours! That deadline was supposed to hit Monday evening, around 8 in the evening Eastern Time. And then on Monday morning, he postponed it. 5 more days, the 48-hour ultimatum became a 7-day window, just like that. Here's the thing, and this is the part that I think really matters. The explanation Trump gave for the delay and the explanation Iran gave for the delay are not just different, they are mutually exclusive. They cannot both be true. Trump says the delay happened because of productive talks. He told reporters at the airport in West Palm Beach that the United States has been negotiating with, quote, the most respected person and the leader in Iran, though not the supreme leader. He said his envoys, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, were leading the discussions, most recently on Sunday night. He told CNN there are 15 points of agreement. He told Fox Business that a deal could happen within 5 days. He said Iran had agreed it would not have a nuclear weapon. He said the Strait of Hormuz would be open very soon. And then he added, almost offhandedly, that he'd like to see the strait jointly controlled, quote, me and the Ayatollah, whoever the Ayatollah is. Iran says none of this is happening. The Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Esmail Baghai said on Monday that, quote, no negotiations have been held with the U.S. The Iranian parliament speaker, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, posted on social media that no talks have taken place. Iran's official Fars news agency, citing unnamed sources, said there have been no direct talks and no mediated communication. Iranian state television went further, declaring that Trump had, quote, withdrawn his 48-hour ultimatum out of fear of Iran's response. The semi-official Tasnim news agency, which is close to the Revolutionary Guard, posted simply, Trump backs down. Now, there is a third possibility here, and it's the one that a number of analysts find most plausible. It's possible that some communication has happened through intermediaries, through third countries passing messages back and forth, and that both sides are describing that communication in the way that serves them best. Trump calls it negotiations and claims major progress. Iran calls it messages from friendly countries and says their position hasn't changed. Retired Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster, now a CBS News contributor, offered a fascinating observation on this. He said the Iranian regime is so fragmented from the strikes that its own foreign ministry probably doesn't know who in the country is talking to whom. Think about that. The regime has been so thoroughly hit that the left hand may genuinely not know what the right hand is doing. And this gets to something Trump himself said that was remarkably revealing. When a reporter asked him who the U.S. was talking to in Iran, he said, quote, a top person, and then added, don't forget, we've wiped out the leadership, phase 1, phase 2, and largely phase 3. But we're dealing with the man who I believe is the most respected and the leader. It's a little tough. We've wiped out everybody. When asked if he could name this person, Trump said, quote, I can't because I don't want him to be killed. Multiple Israeli and international media outlets, citing anonymous sources, identified the likely interlocutor as the Iranian parliament speaker, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf. Reuters reported that the White House had proposed a direct meeting between Ghalibaf and U.S. officials on Saturday, but that Tehran had not yet responded. Which is interesting, because Ghalibaf himself publicly denied that any talks had taken place. So here's where this gets genuinely complicated. While Trump talks about a deal, and Iran denies any deal exists, the war on the ground has not stopped for a single second. Let's walk through what else happened on Monday, the same day Trump announced his 5-day pause. In Israel, the cities of Dimona and Arad, both near Israel's main nuclear research center, had been hit by Iranian missiles over the weekend. Nearly 200 people were wounded. The Israeli military admitted it was unable to intercept those missiles. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the fact that no one was killed was, quote, due to luck, not their intention. Their intention is to murder civilians. In Iran, the casualties are staggering. A US-based human rights monitoring group called Harana reported that at least 1,407 Iranian civilians have been killed since the war began, including 214 children. An additional 1,167 military personnel are dead. Another 657 deaths have not yet been classified as civilian or military. CBS News, citing a separate rights group, put the broader toll at more than 3,200 killed. In Lebanon, at least 1,039 people have been killed in Israeli strikes since March 2nd, including 118 children. In the UAE, 8 dead, 161 wounded. In Israel, 16 killed. 13 U.S. service members have died, including 6 in a refueling aircraft crash in Iraq, and 6 killed in an Iranian strike on a makeshift operations center in Kuwait. In Kuwait, 6 killed, including an 11-year-old girl. In Bahrain, in Saudi Arabia, in Oman, in the occupied West Bank, there are casualties everywhere. The president of the International Committee of the Red Cross, Mirjana Spoljaric, said on Monday that what we have seen in recent days risks reaching a point of no return. She specifically warned about attacks on civilian infrastructure, saying, quote, "War on essential infrastructure is war on civilians." And that brings us back to the power plants. Because the thing Trump threatened to hit and then postponed hitting is not a military target. It's civilian infrastructure. The Washington Post reported that the U.S. military had itself been trying to avoid strikes on Iranian energy infrastructure, not only because of the market impact, but because strikes on power plants are a violation of the Geneva Conventions because of their effect on civilians. Legal experts told CNN the same thing. Craig Jones, a senior lecturer at Newcastle University, said there isn't a distinct military advantage to hitting power plants, and that retaliation and retribution are simply off the table under international law. The UN Special Rapporteur on Counterterrorism said such attacks, if carried out, would constitute war crimes. And yet, Trump threatened to do it. And when Iran responded to that threat, Iran didn't just threaten to hit back, it threatened to hit back 3 times over. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps announced that if Iranian power plants were attacked, Iran would retaliate by targeting, quote, "the power plants of the occupying regime and the power plants of regional countries that supply electricity to U.S. bases, as well as the economic, industrial, and energy infrastructures in which Americans have shares." And then, just to make the point crystal clear, Iranian news outlets published a list of regional power facilities, including desalination plants across the Gulf and the Barakah nuclear power plant in the United Arab Emirates, which has 4 active reactors. Iran's Defense Council went further. They warned that any attack on Iranian shores or islands would lead to the deployment of naval mines, moored and drifting mines across all access routes in the Persian Gulf. In that case, they said, the entire Persian Gulf would effectively face a prolonged situation similar to the Strait of Hormuz. They pointedly reminded the world that in the 1980s, more than 100 minesweepers failed to clear a limited number of mines in those same waters. I have to tell you, that is a threat that should keep people up at night. Because if Iran mines the Persian Gulf, this energy crisis doesn't end in 5 days or 10 weeks. It ends when somebody figures out how to sweep thousands of square miles of ocean, and history tells us that takes a very, very long time. Now, while all of this was happening on Monday, while Trump was talking about deals, and Iran was threatening mines, and Israeli jets were hitting Tehran, the rest of the world was scrambling to figure out what was real. Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer told a parliamentary committee that his government was aware that talks were happening between the US and Iran, and that he welcomed them. But then he said something that cut through the optimism. He said Britain must plan for the possibility that this war could last for some time. He warned against taking, quote, false comfort in the thought that there will necessarily be a quick and early end to this. Starmer also announced that Britain was deploying short-range air defense systems to Bahrain, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. The UK is sending its Rapid Sentry anti-drone system to Kuwait, a battle-tested ground-based air defense system. A British warship, HMS Dragon, arrived in the eastern Mediterranean to defend Cyprus. Britain now has more military jets in the region than at any point in the last 15 years. That is not not the posture of a country that thinks peace is 5 days away. Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz said he was grateful to Trump for the delay, saying he had expressed concerns about attacking power plants in a phone call the day before. China called on the US and Israel to halt military operations, with a foreign ministry spokesman warning that if hostilities continue to spread, the entire region will be plunged into chaos. Turkey's foreign minister held more than a dozen calls with regional and global counterparts in 48 hours. Egypt said it appreciates Trump's decision and urged all sides to seize the opportunity. The Omani foreign minister wrote on social media minutes before Trump's announcement, "Whatever your view of Iran, this war is not of their making." And here in the United States, the military was not standing down. CBS News reported that there has been no change in plans to send thousands more Marines to the Middle East. A second Marine expeditionary unit of about 2,200 Marines and 3 warships departed California last week. The first Marine unit coming from the Pacific is still en route. Elements of the 82nd Airborne Division are still ordered to prepare to deploy. Trump has been deliberating whether to position ground forces in the region. Meanwhile, shipping analysts warn that global shipping could reroute around the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa for the rest of 2026. Peter Sand, chief analyst at the ocean freight data firm Zanetta, told CNN that transiting through the Strait of Hormuz is, quote, completely off the charts for the rest of 2026. So here is what to watch in the next 5 days, because this is a countdown and the clock is already ticking. First, will Israel respect the American pause? Because so far, the evidence suggests it won't. Israel struck central Tehran on the same day Trump announced the delay. Israel has been operating on its own timeline throughout this conflict, and there is nothing in Trump's announcement that suggests he asked Israel to stop. Second, will Iran use these 5 days to reposition? The IRGC's semi-official Fars news agency reported on Monday evening that, quote, special plans are arranged tonight for Tel Aviv and some regional allies of the US and Israel, which will completely remove any hope of negotiation from the minds of the aggressors. That is not the language of a country preparing for a peace deal. Third, the nuclear question hasn't gone away. The Washington Post reported that Iran still has an estimated 440 kilograms of highly enriched uranium, about 970 pounds, believed to be buried in canisters deep underground following US strikes on nuclear facilities last June. Trump said Iran agreed to give up its nuclear weapon, but Iran has made no such public commitment. And as one former Trump-Iran negotiator pointed out on CNN, both sides might be telling the truth about different conversations happening at different levels with different people toward different ends. Fourth, watch the oil markets, because markets are reacting to words right now, not to reality. Brent crude dropped 10% on Monday after Trump's announcement, falling briefly below $100 a barrel, but it's still roughly a third higher than before the war started. And if the talks collapse, or if Israel launches another major strike, or if Iran makes good on its threat to mine the entire Gulf, those prices will snap back in an instant. And fifth, watch Trump himself, because this is a president whose deadlines, as Al Jazeera's correspondent noted, tend to be elastic. The 48-hour ultimatum became a 5-day extension. The question is whether 5 days becomes 10, whether 10 becomes a permanent pause, or whether the whole thing unravels and we end up exactly where we started, except with 5 more days of casualties. There is something deeply unsettling about a world where the president says we're close to a deal, and the other side says the president is lying, and the bombs keep falling anyway, and the only people who seem to fully understand what's at stake are the civilians in Ahvaz and Mashhad who walked out of their homes this morning and stood in front of their power plants because they had nothing else left to do. Those human chains, those people holding flags and linking arms in front of electrical infrastructure, they are the most honest thing in this entire story. They are not pretending there's a deal. They are not pretending the threat is over. They are standing there because they know the threat is real, and they know that what happens in the next 5 days might determine whether their city goes dark. The clock is ticking. 5 days. And the only certainty right now is that nothing about this war has gone the way anyone said it would.